Peace be with you as we go into this morning of your daily dose of elevation, leveling up your spirit one stream at a time. Today, we're going to be talking about she who has always been, the ancient feminine throughout scriptures. But first, we're going to start off with with a song, like we do most mornings. This one's called "The Woman Who Stood in the Last Days."
I saw a woman clothed in dawnlight, her feet upon the shifting earth, and in her hand she carried fire that the darkness could not curb. Her name was whispered through the heavens, a name the storms already knew, for she walked with the Lamb in the shadows, and the shadows could not break through. And beside her stood a child, marked with grace before his birth, a boy whose steps shook kingdoms, whose voice carried ancient worth. 5, the child of promise, born in the pattern of miracle suns, a light set high on the ramparts when the final trumpet comes. The dragon rose in fury, seeking the ones God sealed, but the woman stood unshaken, and the child was kept and healed. Angels circled like thunderbirds, their wings a wall of flame, and the Lamb wrote on their foreheads the truth of his unbroken name. Babylon trembled at their rising, her towers cracked like bone, for the mother and her promised son walked in power not their own. And when the rider split the heavens with fire in his eyes of gold, they stood among the faithful in the story the prophets told.
That was The Woman Who Stood in the Last Days, which we are going to talk about. She who has always been. This is a sermon in 7 movements on the sacred feminine across traditions. From Proverbs 8, 1 through 3, does not wisdom call out? Does she not raise her voice at the highest point along the way where the paths meet? She takes her stand. Beside the gate leading into the city, at the entrance, she cries aloud. From the closing liturgical response, she was there before the first word was spoken. She has always been, and she's not done. This will be a 1 hour it's a 1 hour sermon for theologically literate interfaith audiences. If you want to learn, we are here to teach. If you're here to just listen, welcome. And it's not a mistake that you're here today. Come, wisdom. Come, you who were there before the morning stars sang together. Come, you who stood at the crossroads and called out not in a whisper, but in a voice that carried across every city gate, every marketplace, every silent room where someone was trying to decide whether to be brave. Come, Sophia. Come, Hakma. Come, you who have 1,000 names of an answer to all of them. We are listening. We are at last listening. I'm going to read Proverbs 8, 1 through 3 again. Does not wisdom call out? Does she not raise her voice? At the highest point along the way where the paths meet, she takes her stand beside the gate leading into the city, and at the entrance, she cries aloud. Wisdom, she's not hiding. That is the first thing to understand. She's not some esoteric secret waiting to be unlocked by the properly initiated, the academically credentialed, or the sufficiently progressive. She's standing at the city gate, crying aloud. The Hebrew word is korah, to call out, to proclaim, to name. She's not whispering in a corner. She is proclaiming in the public square. The question has never been whether she's speaking. The question has always been whether we were willing to hear her. This morning, this hour, wherever it is that you are gathering from, we're going to try to hear her. We're going to follow her voice across 5,000 years of sacred history, through Sumerian temples, Hebrew midrash, through apocalyptic visions and wisdom poetry, through the arguments of feminine theologians and the silence of erased priestesses. We are going on a journey through sacred time, and our guide is a woman. The central question this sermon asks is deceptively simple. Who is this woman who appears at the edge of every sacred story, crowned, feared, beloved, erased, and reborn? She appears in the oldest hymns in human literacy, sung by a priestess in ancient Sumer. She appears on a disruptive memory in the margins of the Hebrew Bible. She appears in the terrifying luminous visions of John of Patmos, clothed with the sun and pursued by a dragon, as the song we just listened to stated. She appears in the wisdom literature as a dancing, laughing, pre-existent divine being who was present at creation itself. She has been worshipped. She has been demonized. She has been written out of the story, and every time she has come back. We will move through 7 movements today, 5 figures, a synthesis, and a blessing. And by the end, I want you to know something you perhaps already knew in your bones, but had not yet been given permission to say aloud. She has always been, and she's not done. First, we touch on the Queen of Heaven, Inanna and Ishtar. Close your eyes for a moment and go back. Not to the beginning of the Bible, not to the Garden of Eden, but further back than that, back to the city of Uruk, U-R-U-K, in the flat river valley of what is now southern Iraq, around the year 3000 before the Common Era, BCE. Uruk is one of the first cities in human beings' history to ever have been built. A place of 30 to 40,000 people, which in its day made it the largest city on earth. It has temples, markets, scribes, artists, musicians, and priests. And at the center of its spiritual life, at the center of its great ziggurat, its stepped temple mountain reaching toward the heavens, is a goddess. Her name is Inanna. Inanna. She is the Queen of Heaven. She is the goddess of love, desire, war, justice, political power, and the evening star, which the Babylonians called Venus. She is simultaneously the most tender and the most terrifying deity in the Sumerian pantheon. She is the one who makes the grain grow and the one who leads the armies into battle. She is the one who proceeds over erotic love and the one who descends into death. She contains multitudes because the divine has always contained multitudes, even when we insisted on reducing it into something manageable. Across the border of language and empire, the Akkadian and Babylonian peoples knew this same goddess as Ishtar. The Akkadians called her Shorat Shami, the Queen of Heaven, a title that would echo across the millennia of sacred history. But whether she was called Inanna or Ishtar, the core of her mythology remained she was the oldest, the first, the one who had been there before the gods remembered themselves. And the central story told about her is one of the most extraordinary pieces of sacred literature ever composed. It's the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld. And if you have ever read Ishtar of Babylon, in the beginning of this is a prologue that also talks about her descent to heaven, or her descent from heaven to earth, because she felt pity on man. Inanna, Queen of Heaven, decides to descend into the great below, the underworld ruled by her sister Ereshkigal, goddess of death. Before she descends, she instructs her handmaiden Ninshubar, children, if I do not return in 3 days, mourn for me, and then go to the gods and beg for my release. Inanna dresses herself in her 7 divine attributes: her crown, her lapis lazuli beads, her breastplate, her golden ring, her measuring rod, her royal robe, and her pectoral. She is the most powerful being in heaven, and then she walks through the first gate of the underworld. At each gate, the gatekeeper demands that she surrender one of her divine attributes. The first, her crown; the second, her beads; the third, her breastplate. Gate by gate, attribute by attribute, Inanna is stripped of everything that makes her divine. She was clothed in divine power, now arrives before the throne of death, naked, bowed, stripped of every protection she had, and death kills her. The Queen of Heaven hangs on a hook like a piece of rotting meat. She is dead. For 3 days and 3 nights, Inanna hangs there. And then Ninshubar does exactly as she was instructed, and the gods send 2 small creatures, no bigger than flies, who sneak past the gates and sprinkle the food of life and the water of life upon Inanna, and she rises. We recognize this pattern from the Passion narratives, from other mythical traditions of the dark night of the soul, from every initiation story that's ever been told. This was the first. Now, here's the detail that should stop every person familiar with the Hebrew Bible in their tracks. The title of this goddess, Queen of Heaven, Sharat appears in the Hebrew Bible, not once, repeatedly. In the book of Jeremiah, the prophet rages against the women of Judah who are burning incense, baking cakes, and pouring out drink offerings to the Queen of Heaven. Jeremiah 7:18 and chapter 44, verses 17 and 19. The women respond that this is extraordinary. They respond that when they worshipped the Queen of Heaven, they had plenty and were well, and it was only when they stopped that disaster came. The prophet denounces them, but the women are not confused. They know who they are worshiping. They are worshiping the goddess who had been there since before Israel was Israel. She was never fully suppressed. She was never entirely gone. One more thing, around 2300 BCE, that's 700 years later, a woman named Enheduanna composed the hymns that were sung to Inanna in the temples of Sumer. Enheduanna was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, the first empire builder in human history. He was the first construction worker, and he built the empire of Uruk. She was appointed high priestess of the moon god of Ur. She composed the Nin Musara, the exaltation of Inanna, and 42 other hymns. She signed her work. She's the first named author in the history of human literature. The world's first known named author was a woman, and she wrote hymns to a goddess. Let that land for just a moment. Next, we'll talk about Lilith, the first equal. Long before Ishtar's name was erased from temple walls, another woman was being written out of the garden. I want to show you a scene in the text. Genesis 1:27 reads, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them." This scripture has always made me question and wonder, because male and female together simultaneously in the image of God, both of them were created. But then in Genesis 2, it begins and we get a different story. God forms Adam from the dust, puts him in the garden, and later creates a woman from Adam's rib. Now, these are two different creation accounts. Every biblical scholar acknowledges this. They came from two different theological traditions, two different historical periods, and for centuries, Jewish midrashic tradition has asked the obvious question: if the first account also says male and female were created simultaneously in the image of God, who was the first woman? It was not Eve. Eve came from Adam's rib in the second account. So who is the unnamed woman in the first? The Midrash tradition, particularly the alphabet of Ben Sira, written between the 8th and 10th century BCE, which was thousands of years later, gives her a name: Lilith. She was created like Adam from the earth, the same breath, the same moment. She was his equal in every way. And then Adam sought to assert dominance over her. She refused. The text records her argument with precise theological logic. She says, "We are equal because we were both created from the earth." And Adam disagrees. Lilith spoke the secret name of God. She called out to God, grew wings, and flew from the garden. The tradition immediately moves to contain her. She becomes a demon. She's said to prey on newborn infants and seduce sleeping men. She becomes everything that patriarchal cosmology fears about female autonomy: dangerous, predatory, monstrous. Amulets were worn to ward her off. Her name was a curse. There's one mention of something like Lilith in the Hebrew Bible itself. In Isaiah 34:14, in the description of the desolation of Edom, mentions a night creature. The Hebrew word is Lilith, a feminine form derived from Lael, meaning night. The King James Version translates it as a screech owl. The New International Version calls it a night creature, but the Hebrew is Lilith, a feminine night spirit, a word that carries the weight of everything the tradition has made of her. She lives in the ruins. She haunts the desolate places. She is quite literally what is left when the empire falls. In 1972, a young theologian named Judith Plaskow wrote a midrash, a creative rereading of the tradition called The Coming of Lilith. In it, Lilith and Eve meet over the garden wall. They look at each other across the hedge of everything that has been said to separate them, the respectful wife and the dangerous exile. And they choose each other. They become friends. They begin to compare notes. And together they ask the questions that the text has never wanted them to ask. Bubba, I'm teaching. Are you going to listen? Theologically, Lilith is a story of what happens when a woman asserts equality in a system not built for her equality. She's not evil. She's not monstrous. She simply is equal. And that equality in the logic of patriarchy is the most dangerous. It's more dangerous than any demon. She is then demonized. She's exiled. She's rewritten into a monster so that no one will sympathize with her, so that no woman in the community will see herself in her and begin to ask the same questions. But here's what the tradition could not quite accomplish. She would not disappear. She became a subversive memory. She became a question in the margins of the text. She became the figure that kept surfacing in folk traditions and mythical literature in the imagination of women who knew in their bones that the story as they had received it was missing something. Now, let me ask you something directly. How many Liliths are here right now? How many women, how many people of any gender whose gifts were called dangerous, whose questions were called disruptive, whose very presence made the institution uncomfortable, who were written out of the story, told to sit down, told their wings were a problem? The exile of Lilith is not ancient history. It is happening right now in denominations and congregations across this country. Every time a woman is told her calling is not quite right, her voice is not quite appropriate, her leadership is not quite within the proper order of things. Every time that happens, Lilith flies out of the garden again and again and again. But here's the word of grace this morning. Lilith's flight was not a fall. It was an act of faith. She literally called on the name of God and was blessed. She trusted that her equality was real, even when the world around her insisted it was not. She chose the wilderness, exile, demonization, erasure over the compromise of her own nature. And in the end, the tradition could not kill her. They could only call her a demon, and even that did not stick. Lilith's exile was not the end of her story. It was the first act of a very long resurrection. And we just spoke about Inanna and her rebirth story and her resurrection. We played that song earlier, and I'm going to play it one more time while I get some liquid in my throat. And then we'll talk about the woman clothed with the sun from Revelation 12. The woman who stood in the last days.
I saw a woman clothed in dawnlight, her feet upon the shifting earth, and in her hand she carried fire that the darkness could not curb. Her name was whispered through the heavens, a name the storms already knew, for she walked with the Lamb in the shadows, and the shadows could not break through. And beside her stood a child, marked with grace before his birth, a boy whose steps shook kingdoms, whose voice carried ancient worth. I, the child of promise, born in the pattern of miracle sons, a light set high on the ramparts when the final trumpet comes. The dragon rose in fury, seeking the ones God sealed, but the woman stood unshaken, and the child was kept and healed. Angels circled like thunderbirds, their wings a wall of flame, and the Lamb wrote on their foreheads the truth of his unbroken name. Babylon trembled at their rising, the towers cracked like bone, for the mother and her promised son walked in on their own. And when the light split the heavens with fire, in his eyes of gold, they stood among the faithful in the story the prophets told.
By the way, if you like any of the music from the sermons, you can find it online on Suno. If you look up my account, you will find it. They're all created from my brain with the help of AI, but still from my brain. I can't program music, and I can't afford to pay someone, so Suno helps. Not that that's an ad there or anything, but whatever. The next is The Woman Clothed with the Sun, Revelation 12, which the song was about. Now we enter the apocalyptic space, the scorching, visionary world of John of Patmos, writing in exile around 94 CE. John is a prisoner, or at least in exile, on a small volcanic island in the Aegean Sea. The Roman Empire has executed his community's lord, scattered his community's leaders, and is now, under the Emperor Domitian, conducting a systematic program of pressure against the nascent Jesus movement. Hi, Faith. I'm good. John is not writing theology in a comfortable study. He's writing resistant literature from the margins of the empire. And in his vision, his great, terrifying, luminous vision, he sees a woman. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its heads. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that it might devour her child the moment he was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Revelation 12, 1-5. She's clothed with the sun. The moon is under her feet, and on her head is a crown of 12 stars. She's pregnant, and she's in labor, and she's in pain, and in front of her stands the great red dragon. 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns, waiting to devour her child the moment it's born, and yet she gives birth. The dragon does not stop the birth. No empire, no terror, no power of death can prevent what she carries from entering the world. Now, who is she? Scholars across centuries have argued over this question, and the remarkable answer is that she is probably all of the above simultaneously. She is Israel, the 12 stars who echoed Joseph's dream in Genesis 37, 9-11, where the sun is Jacob, the moon is Rachel, and the 12 stars are the brothers who will become the 12 tribes of Israel. She is the church, the community laboring to bring the Christ into every generation. She is Eve, the mother of all living, the woman whose offspring will crush the serpent's head from Genesis 3:15. She is Mary, the one through whom the Word was made flesh, and she is something older and larger than any single identification. We've talked about Inanna, Ishtar, we've talked about Lilith. Now we talk about this other perspective of it. She is the cosmic feminine, the mother of all sacred possibilities, the one who labors in the darkness while the power of death wait to devour what she brings forth. When John says the woman flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days, he's not picking a number at random. Remember, he is talking to the Jewish people. 1,260 days is 42 months, 3.5 years, and that number carries a specific, terrible memory for every Jew and Jewish Christian in John's audience. 3.5 years is precisely how long Atticus IV of Epiphanes, the Seleucid Greek emperor, he desecrated the temple in Jerusalem between 167 and 164 BCE. He was slaughtering pigs on the altar, which pigs, if you know anything about the Jewish culture, they were dirty animals. They didn't eat them. They didn't sacrifice them. He forbid Torah observance. He was executing those who circumcised their sons. 3.5 years of that empire laying its hands on the Holy of Holies. When John's readers hear 1,260 days, they feel it in their blood. They knew what it meant to survive that length of terror and come out the other side. The woman in the wilderness is not a romantic image. The wilderness is the biblical imagination of the place of testing, of stripping you down, of survival without comfort. If we go back to Inanna's story, it was when she was descending into the underworld, being stripped of everything that was divine about her, being tested to see if she would give it up. It is where Moses wandered for 40 years and where Jesus was tempted for 40 days. It's where Elijah fled after his life was threatened. The wilderness is where you go when the empire has no room for you. When the city has turned against you, when the only thing between you and death is the provision of God and the resilience of your own endurance. And the woman goes there and she survives. Now, I want to ask everyone this morning, where's the wilderness in your life? Where are you enduring something the empire has inflicted? The empire of systematic violence, the empire of economic cruelty, the empire of silence imposed on the voices of the marginalized. Where are you in the 1260 days, and what are you carrying into the world despite the dragon's best effort? Because the woman of Revelation 12 is not a historical artifact, she's a pastoral reality. She is every community that has survived what should have been destroyed. No, not what should have been destroyed, what keeps trying to destroy it. She's every person who gave birth to something holy in the middle of something terrible. All of those who had dreams that people said, that's never going to happen. She is that person and that manifestation of when it does. And she endured, not because she was invulnerable, but because she carried indestructibility. What she carried was indestructible, that hope, that dream. The dragon cannot stop the birth. It has never been able to stop the birth. And the woman, wrapped in the sun, crowned with the stars, standing on the moon, she knows this. And she has always known this. And so she keeps laboring. And we're going to go a few more chapters away from Revelation 12, where we're going to touch on the woman on the scarlet beast from Revelation 17. Now, John's apocalypse gives us two women, and one of them is far more uncomfortable. If the woman of Revelation 12 is the sermon's hero today, the Revelation 17 gives us her apparent opposite. But in each of us, we carry this. And we cannot preach the sacred feminine without sitting with her, all of her, including the parts that disturb us. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, and she was glittered with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand, filled with the abominable things and the filth of her idolatries. And the name written on her forehead was a mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people and the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Revelation 17, 4-6. She's seated on a scarlet beast, and she is arrayed in the colors of the Roman imperial power, purple and scarlet, and the dyes that only the immensely wealthy could carry and afford. She is adorned with gold and precious stones. She holds a golden cup full of abominations. She's drunk on the blood of the saints, and her name is written on her forehead like a brand, mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. We must engage this text with honesty, and that honesty begins with the naming two things simultaneously. The first, Elizabeth Schussler-Forenzo is correct that Babylon is Rome in this instance, a critique of the empire wrapped in the language of feminine embodiment. The second, Tina Pippin is also correct that the imagery of a woman's body as the vessel of imperial evil, a body that is then publicly stripped and destroyed in Revelation 18, is not without its problems, and those problems have not been merely theoretical. The image of the dangerous, corrupting, wealthy, sexually threatening woman has been deployed across history to justify violence against women. And John did not intend that. But texts do things their authors don't intend them to do. So who was the whore of Babylon really? She was Rome. She was the very system that intoxicated the powerful while crushing the poor. She's the very empire that decks itself in luxury while drinking the blood of the marginalized. She is every institute that claims sacred authority while serving the interests of domination. And critically, definitively, at the text itself declares she's not a woman. She is a city. Revelation 17:18 could not be plainer. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. John using a female body as a metaphor for imperial power. and we must name with pastoral care that this metaphorical choice is not innocent. The association of female embodiment with corruption and danger has consequences that extend far beyond John's original context. But the prophetic cry beneath the image is real and necessary. Babylon must fall. The empire that devours the saints will itself be devoured. The system that wears purple and scarlet and calls itself divine while drinking the blood of the poor is not eternal, it is doomed. The pattern of sacred and imperial legitimation, which we recognize not only in ancient Rome, but in every theocracy that has used God's name to justify its own power, even today, is precisely what John is naming and condemning. And that condemnation is one of the most urgent theology tasks of every generation. For those who are in power but are drinking the bloods of the poor, meaning they are reaping the benefits of keeping these people controlled and poor and desolate. Notice the connection. The same tradition that suppressed Inanna, exiled Lilith, and persecuted the woman clothed with the sun also built the Babylon that intoxicated the world. They condemned all these images of a woman and yet used a woman's image to intoxicate the world. The reoccurring pattern across the sermon's 5 movements is empire. Empire suppresses the voices it cannot control. We call it a different name now: government, ruling upper class. Empire demonizes the bodies it cannot contain. Think of it in sexual assault cases. What do they say? Well, she wanted it. She was asking for it. They condemned the innocent victim and instead turned her into the whore of Babylon. Empire writes the dangerous feminine out of its sanctioned texts and then wonders why she keeps appearing in the margins. And the reoccurring counter-witness across Sumar, across the Hebrew Bible, across the visions of John of Patmos is the woman who refuses to bow. Inanna descended and rose. Lilith flew. The woman of Revelation endured the wilderness, and the whore of Babylon, stripped of the imperial metaphor John draped over her, is a city full of people the empire ground to dust, people whose death John is demanding be remembered and named. And if you remember correctly, she is not the one condemned, but those who worshipped her image. She is a lament as much as she is a condemnation. She is what the empire does to people, written in the language of female embodiment, with all the complexities and all of the cost that choice entails. Next, we are going to speak about Sophia, Miriam's daughter, or the female Christ. Now I want to ask the same tender question of this sermon. What if the Logos, the Word, the Christ, had been understood differently? What if the feminine face of God had not been suppressed?
Do I have a thing right here?
No.
Here.
Is your head hurt?
Yeah, like right here. Like there's a scratch because I'm sweaty.
Oh, yeah, there is. I see it now. Your hand is not on it. It's right there.
Oh. I accidentally poked his eye, but I got some of the eye boogers out.
That's good. You have any more eye boogers, little kitty?
He does. I saw them. Love you.
I love you too. He's crying. Long before the Gospel of John opened with, "In the beginning was the Word," another sacred text used almost identical language about a very different figure. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, a woman named Wisdom, Chachma in Hebrew, Sophia in Greek, speaks in the first person about her own origin and her presence at creation. Listen to what she says. Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 23, 27, and verses 31 through 30 through 31. Blah, blah, blah. The Lord brought me forth at the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was formed long before ages ago, at the very beginning when the world came to be. I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. This is not a metaphor for abstract wisdom. This is a pre-existent, active, creative, divine being who was present at creation, who delighted in it, who danced at its edges. She's not derived from anything but the first words of God. She is there when the heavens were set in place. She rejoices in the whole world and in humanity itself. She is, in every meaningful theological sense, divine. The tradition continues. In Sirach 24, Sophia speaks again of her cosmic origin and her dwelling among humanity. In the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 7, she's described as a breath of the power of God and a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty. She is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, and an image of his goodness. This is the language of divinity. This is the language that within 2 centuries, the author of the Gospel of John would apply with his masculine noun, logos, to the incarnate word. Elizabeth Schusler Forenza, in her landmark work, Jesus, Miriam's Child, Sophia's Prophet, argues that the earliest Jesus movement understood Jesus not primarily through the lens of royal messianism or priestly sacrifice, but through the lens of Sophia's prophetic tradition. Jesus is presented in the Q source, the hypothetical document of saying shared by John and Luke. So it's a hypothetical document that they believe Matthew and Luke shared to write their Gospels. As a prophet and emissary of wisdom, even as wisdom incarnate, come to me, Jesus says in Matthew 11:28 through 29, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Language that echoes almost verbatim Sirach 51:23 through 27, where it is Sophia who invites the weary to come to her and take her yoke. This saying may have been Sophia's before it was Jesus's. This Sophia Christology, the understanding of Jesus as the incarnation of divine wisdom, feminine in gender and creative in nature, was not absent from a Christian tradition. It was present, and then it was gradually eclipsed by the more masculine logos Christology of the Johnian tradition, which itself was shaped by Hellenistic philosophical currents that associated reason with the masculine and matter with the feminine. The feminine face of Christ was not invented by feminist theologians in the 20th century. It was presented at the beginning and then systematically marginalized. Rosemary Radford Ruther, in her foundational work, Sexism and God Talk, asks a question that has never been satisfactorily, big words sometimes. This is why I wasn't sure I was supposed to do any of this, but I keep getting told to do this and be here. So they answered by the tradition that prompted it. Can a male savior save women? It's not a dismissive question. It's a profoundly theological question about the nature of the incarnation. But the question remains that Christ was raised by a female, mainly his mother, though Joseph was his stepfather. But he was the feminine, more softer side than the Old Testament angry, rageful God. If the incarnation is about God entering fully into human vulnerability, if it is about the divine taking on flesh, limitation, suffering, mortality, then why can that vulnerability only be expressed through a male body? What is it about maleness that is uniquely capable of representing all of humanity before God? In 1974, sculptor Edwina Sandys created a piece she called Christa, a female corpus on a crucifix, the crucified body of a woman, arms spread, head bowed in the posture of the Passion. When it was displayed in the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York in 1984, it provoked enormous controversy. Some called it blasphemous, some called it heretical. Some wept before it, some knelt. What does it mean? It means this: if we take seriously the theological claim that the incarnation is about solidarity with the suffering, with those who are beaten, humiliated, stripped, crucified by the powers of the empire and domination, then we must ask who in our world is most consistently beaten, humiliated, stripped, and crucified. And the answer, across most of human history, includes women. The Christa is not a replacement for Christ. She is a revelation about what the cross has always meant, seen from the side of those who have been hanging on that cross that theology refuses to notice. Again, at the very beginning of this sermon, we talked about Inanna hanging on a meat hook. Here in this movement, all 5 figures of this sermon are beginning to converge into a single theological pattern. Inanna descended through the 7 gates into death and was resurrected. Her descent is kenosis, the self-emptying of the divine power that Paul describes in Philippians 2:7. Lilith was exiled for claiming her equality. Her exile is a prophetic voice that will not be domesticated, that carries on speaking in the wilderness because it cannot speak any other way. The woman of Revelation 12 labored through cosmic warfare and survived. Her endurance is the persistence of the community of faith through every empire that has tried to destroy it. Sophia danced at the edges of creation, pre-existent, delighted, divine. Her presence is a reminder that the feminine face of God was not added to the tradition by modern feminists, but was embedded in the traditions from the beginning, waiting to be remembered. If incarnation means anything at all, it means that God took on the vulnerability of all humanity, not just the half of humanity that has historically held power over the other half. The female Christ is not an invention, she is a recognition. She is the name we finally give to what has always been there, hiding in plain sight in the wisdom literature and the Sophia traditions and the descending goddess and the exiled first wife, the sacred feminine, crucified, descending, rising in every tradition, in every age, by every name she has ever been called. There are tens of thousands of names just for God. Why can't they be male and female names? She who has always been. A closing synopsis. We've traveled far this morning. We've stood at the ziggurat of ancient Uruk and heard the hymns of Enheduanna, the first female author, the first author in history. We've followed Inanna through 7 gates of stripping and death and watching her rise. We've looked at the blank space in Genesis 1 where a woman stood before she was written out, and we learned her name, Lilith. We've stood in the scorching light of Revelation 12 and watched a woman clothed with the sun give birth while the dragon waited. We've sat with the unsettling horror of Revelation 17 and the critique of empire embedded in its imagery. And we've listened to Sophia, ancient, playful, pre-existent, divine, sing of her delight at the edge of creation. Now let me draw them together, not into sameness, they're not the same, but into the portrait that emerges when we stand back far enough to see all 5 at once. Inanna, stripped at the gates of death and hanging naked before the throne of death, is the Christ who emptied himself, who, in the language of Paul's magnificent kenosis hymn, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, from Philippians 2:6-7. The pattern of voluntary descent into humiliation and death, followed by resurrection and restoration, is older than Christianity. It is the pattern of the sacred itself encountering the limits of mortality and surviving. Lilith, who refused to bow, who flew out of the garden rather than live as less than what she was made to be, is a prophetic voice that will not be silenced. She is every mystic who was told her experience of God was unauthorized. She is every prophet who was told the institution could not accommodate her call. She is every person whose exile over self-betrayal was chosen. And in choosing exile, they chose a harder, more honest form of faithfulness. The woman of Revelation 12 enduring the wilderness for 1,260 days while the dragon raged and the empire pressed down is the church persisting through every empire that has tried to destroy. And when I talk about the church, I'm not talking about the building with the 4 walls that you can go to once a week. I'm talking about the gathering of the people who talk about God and the wisdom therein. She is the community of the faithful, still here, still laboring, still bringing into the world what the powers of death most want to devour. She is the reason we are still gathered in this moment today. She endured. The whore of Babylon, stripped of her imperial metaphor, looked at with clear and compassionate eyes, is the warning. She is the lament prophecy that says, when the sacred feminine is weaponized by the empire, then the female body is used as a symbol for everything the powerful most fear and most desire. When religion puts on purple and scarlet and calls it holiness, the empire so clothed must be named and resisted because it is drinking the blood of the poor and calling it communion. When your local church is bigger and more embellishable than your schools or your homeless shelter, there's something wrong. And Sophia is the breath beneath all of them. She is the one who was there before the first word was spoken, before the first hymn was sung, before the first temple was built or the first text was written. She danced at creation. She rejoiced in humanity. She called from every crossroads and every city gate. She is the ground of sacred imagination itself. The feminine wisdom that runs like an underground river beneath the entire tradition, surfacing in the books of Proverbs and the Gospel of John and the hymns of Idunana and the anguished questions of the feminist theologians who refused to stop asking. The sacred feminine is not a feminist invention. She is a persistent, trans-traditional, cross-cultural witness to the truth that the divine cannot be confined to one gender, one face, or one name. She has been worshipped in temples built before the pyramids. She has been demonized in the margins of sacred text. She has been crucified on canvas and page and pulpit, and she has been resurrected in every generation that refused to forget her, and every theologian who asked the dangerous questions, and every congregation that made room for what the institution tried to exclude. She is not the enemy of Orthodox. She is the question that the orthodoxy has never fully answered, and perhaps the answer the most needed. And here's the pastoral word I want you to carry out of the room or moment today. If you have ever been told that your voice was too loud, you're in good company. If you were ever told you're too weird or too extra or too whatever, you are in good company. Thank you for being here. Inanna descended into death and came back. If you've ever been told that your questions were too dangerous, you're in good company. Lilith flew out of the garden and refused to return on anyone else's terms. If you have ever been told that your presence was too disruptive, your gifts too irregular, Your calling too inconvenient for the institution to accommodate. You are in good company. The woman of Revelation endured the dragon and the wilderness and came out the other side still wrapped in the sun. And somewhere in the wisdom literature, in the oldest strata of the tradition, before the canons were closed and the margins were standardized and the texts were fixed in their final forms, a woman is laughing. She is playing. She is singing at the edge of creation, delighted by humanity, delighted by the world, delighted by the sheer fact of existence. She was there before the sermon started, and she will be there when the last church closes its doors. She has always been, and she is not done. We came in looking for a name, and we found a woman at the crossroads. We came in looking for an answer, and we found a question that has been asking itself for 5,000 years in every language humanity has ever spoken to the divine. Go now. Take with you the knowledge that you are not the first to have been stripped at the gate and sent into the wilderness. You are not the first to have been told your voice was too much, your wings a problem, your fire a danger to the established order. You are a goddess. You are in the company of Lilith, who chose flight over falseness. You are in company of the woman of Revelation, who gave birth in the shadow of the dragon and did not flinch. You are in the company of Sophia, who was there before the beginning and will be there after every ending. Go and be difficult. Go and be holy. Go and be whole. This has been your daily dose of elevation, leveling up your spirit one stream at a time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being awesomely unique and yourself. You are loved, you are seen, and because you see me, we are here. Blessings to you all.